Announce themselves, or can we just see?
Hey, John, can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead and say you're president. Let's see.
Are we really approving minutes from 2023?
Say you're president. Let's see.
Are we really approving minutes from 2023?
Wow, we got a weird delay going on.
Say you're president. Let's see. Testing, testing. Can you hear? Let me go.
Yep.
Oh. That was a positive.
Let's just see if he starts talking again for 5 seconds. Where's the delay? All right, testing, testing. Can you hear? Let me go.
Yep. Yes, we can hear you.
Don, you can hear? Well, we were having 10 seconds. Let's just see if he starts talking audio, so what you said. 10 seconds. All right, testing, testing. Can you hear?
Yes. One of these days I'll go to a committee meeting and everything will be seamless.
You should be good now.
Legal and tech support.
Must be.
I am.
We were doing a roll call, so everybody present here did, if the members online could announce themselves as present or not.
John Halen present.
Hi, Dawn Cofer, present.
Jennifer Gould, present.
Rachel Colton, present.
Right, and I think that is it. So item number 2 is approval of minutes. And as John was asking, we really do have minutes from March 20th, 2023 on here. Had not noticed that they were from 2 years ago. Everybody looked at the minutes.
Is it 23 or 24, Jonathan?
24.
Okay.
It's not 22. I was gonna say, I think I've seen it more recently.
Okay, so there's a motion to approve the minutes from November 7th, 2024, January 23rd, 2025, and March 20th, 2024.
2025, I'm sorry. It was the last meeting.
March 20th is 25, not 23. Okay,
I motion to approve the minutes as stated.
we have a second.
Awesome.
All right, move seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Well, can I just say, I wasn't there for the November 7th, so but I trust the note takers, so I will vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any vote?
Aye.
All right, excellent. Looks like we're gonna do public comment first. Do we have anybody online or in the room? Looks like it's all staff. I see public online, so we will move on to the next item, which is number 4. Economic Development Strategic Plan Framework. And it looks like we're going to have Cyrus, business advocate for the city of Bend, to do your presentation. Welcome, Cyrus. Thank you.
And one of the little mics. All right, just stand up here. Okay.
Ready. Thank you, CAB members, for having me today. I'm really excited to bring this topic to you. We've had the opportunity to present to council and to our Bend Economic Development Advisory Board about this topic, as well as the Environment and Climate Committee. And CAB is also a critical partner that we want to bring up to speed on what this work plan entails. When you boil it down, it's essentially a work plan that will occur over the next several months through December of this calendar year that hopefully gets us to the adoption of our first economic development strategic plan as the city hopefully that adoption will occur December 3rd. So it's a bit of an aggressive timeline, but we feel really confident with the momentum that we have right now between completing the target sector analysis and also the Burr investment strategy that I know that you guys are very intertwined with. That we can complete this work with all the community partners that are at the table and also encouraged about where we're headed as a community. So that is kind of the intro. 2025, just to give you a sense of the timeline, the first draft of the Bend Urban Renewal Investment Strategy was presented. March 2025, internal and external discussions about evolving the Burra investment strategy to more of a comprehensive economic development strategy. So how do we leverage what we have as a tool with Burra into our economic development planning efforts? April 2nd of this year is when City Council approved this campaign that you're about to review and appointed BDAB as that primary advisory body that would be overseeing the project. April 7th was the first time that BDAB was able to sit down and hear about the work and hear the direction that council had recommended to them. And at our meeting next week on the 21st, we're going to finalize the focus group stakeholders and participation from other city advisory bodies. So the project purpose, as stated, is to develop the first economic development strategic plan that will guide the city's development programs, policies, and partnerships and investments for the next 10 years. The goal is to identify objectives that cultivate stable, long-lasting, and equitable opportunities. And really, this is the common theme that you'll kind of hear throughout, is this upward economic mobility for all who reside in Bend. So we want that to be the notion or the lens that people are thinking through all the different steps with. The final plan aims to set a vision for sustainable and equitable economic development in Bend through 2035, providing key focus areas, strategies, and actions that achieve that vision, and facilitates implementation by recommending priority strategies and actions for the next 5 years. As previously mentioned, we hope that this plan will also assist with the Bend Urban Renewal Investment Strategy as a primary tool that we can deploy within the plan, and recommend roles and structures for the city and external partners. As we know, there's a lot of people that are contributing to this work, so having clearly defined roles for how they contribute and can, I think, be more clear about where they fit in and what lane they can do to achieve that higher goal that we're all working towards. We know that best practice for economic development strategic planning efforts focus on 3 core areas of business, people, and place. So we'll break those down individually and how they'll be incorporated. Business is the primary method of achieving economic growth and prosperity. From recruiting, retaining, and fostering business growth will provide access to that upward economic mobility for workers. It will assist with stabilizing and diversifying our economy and reducing tax burden on local residents. People are the primary reason of why a community wants to enhance its economic development planning efforts. So access to better housing, better paying jobs, quality education, and healthy community resources encourage those lifelong residents while also attracting new neighbors. Lastly, place is the historic character and soul of the community, which I think has a lot to do with our culture. So preserving and enhancing what makes a community unique really has to be at the core of what we're doing alongside development and growth. Access to parks and cultural amenities, restaurants, retail, and sustainable infrastructure systems will increase happiness, reduce community stressors, and foster safety. The development structure breaks down the timeline into these three different core areas. So community assessment, community foundation assessment, and data analysis is where we're at currently. So the target sector work was a starting point with that. We also want to perform a housing and retail market analysis, a demographics analysis, as well as building on that target sector, looking at industry clusters that can be coinciding with those target sectors. So that's an example of the different research we feel needs to be performed. Moving into community engagement, that's where we will engage the focus groups that we've discussed. So we hope to have around 20 community partners be a part of 3 different focus groups that will be sequential in nature, and we'll touch on that here in a bit. And core team and city council. So we have an internal project team consisting of Jonathan and myself as the project managers, but then a variety of different departments that are engaged into the process for a variety of other reasons. And city council involvement, having champions be coming from borough and also city council. This similarly kind of breaks it out in with more specific metrics around the timeline. So determined the position was when we kicked off some of the target sector work early or in late 2024, and we'll go through July of 2025. Developing the strategy is the focus groups and stakeholder interviews that Jonathan and I will be doing. Building the plan will occur from August to November, with that hopeful adoption of the economic development strategy being December 3rd of 2025, where hope is to be adopted, and we'll review that annually and update it biannually. So the focus groups, as mentioned, we're aiming for 20 different community partners, and our hope is that that group will be finalized on April 21st with BDAB, so we can start sending out invitations the following day and having that first focus group be June 10th. So in general, it's an aggressive timeline. So all of these dates are relatively set because one minor delay could hinder the whole process. So the dates are a little specific, but for the focus groups selected by BDAB, they're going to participate in 3 different sessions. Session 1, where are we going and what do we bring? So the intent of session 1 is to allow those folks to really dream big and see what the possibilities are. So this will be before Jonathan and I present all of the data that we had previously referenced. So we're getting those kind of raw feelings about what people would like to see or what they think is feasible in our future in the community. Session 2 will be a little more realistic. Where are we going and what do we want to be? So reviewing the data to give a sense of grounding. So we know what our capabilities are as a community. What do we feel like we can do within our bounds? How do we get there is really outlining the specific steps that we're going to take with all the different community partners with the talents and expertise that each of the partners bring specifically. Broad engagement has to do with the stakeholder interviews as mentioned. So our goal between Jonathan and I is to do 100 stakeholder interviews between now and the end of July or early August. So definitely an ambitious goal, but we feel like it's essential that we reach all parts of the community. So here are some examples of different industry support groups. Like Cultivate Bend is for consumer packaged goods industry folks. I think there's a lot of different groups similar across a variety of different sectors that we want to make sure we're reaching out to so they feel like they can help shape and influence the strategy in some way, shape, or form. The stakeholder focus group folks are pretty direct and targeted. You know, they're there for a very specific reason and how we feel like they situate within the plan. So the stakeholder interviews is more of that broad engagement. The development team, as mentioned, we want to have champions from city council and from borough, and those folks have already given a head nod that they would put themselves forward to serve as these champions. So Mayor Pro Tem Megan Perkins, she also serves as the council liaison to BDAB, and the borough chair Mike Riley, for obvious reasons. Project managers, as mentioned, would be Jonathan and myself. And the project team will consist of Cassie Lacey, who runs our environment and climate programs. She's a senior management analyst. Kate Schneider is our executive policy officer. Carrie Bell is our middle income housing coordinator. Damian Cernick works in our growth management team. Carrie Carl runs all of our emergency preparedness programs. Matt Stewart is our real estate director, and we're gonna have actually Kathy Bargwell serve in the communications and equity role. So the question to have today is, what recommendation do you have for the Bend Economic Development Advisory Board for including additional citizen advisory body participation in this process, and any other questions that you have with all of the information that was just thrown at you?
Well, I read all the materials that you sent to us, and I seem to recall there was a larger list of people that you're going to be contacting, like the chamber. So I don't really have a whole lot to add, other than kind of I'm on this board to sort of represent affordable housing and housing issues. And so just making sure that, you know, I've heard over and over, I'm a member of the chamber as well, of how difficult it is to get people to accept jobs here because of the cost of housing, and that pretty much 50% of people who work here commute in.
Right.
And so I think housing is a really critical component. So however you can reach out, maybe the Home Builders Association as well as the chamber, you know, and just keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the two partners that you mentioned are primary to the focus group members that we'd like to have there. And just looking at the goals that are included currently in the council goal framework for what we're trying to achieve in the next biennium, it is extremely ambitious.
Yeah.
So that will definitely be a metric that's incorporated into the plan. So thank you for mentioning it.
Cyrus, just a kind of a question more than anything, but yeah, I'm really kind of surprised to hear that this is really sort of the first economic development plan that the city is doing.
I am shocked too. I
Yeah,
thought
I
for
mean,
sure he'd done it
9,000
before.
Residents who have been in existence for 120 years, and yeah, so it's sort of surprising to me to kind of hear it put that way. Does this represent a major change? I know EDCO has kind of been, you know, the agency out in front, or the, not really an agency, but a community partner, I guess. Is this pulling back from that relationship to some degree?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think that the city has heavily relied on partners such as EDCO, the Chamber, COIC, et cetera. There's a lot of existing plans out there, and we want to take what we can out of those plans to make sure they're in alignment with what we develop. But I think from council and from the city manager's office, they would really like to see the city have more of a directive approach in how we do economic development here locally. And to your point, EDCO, they're a regional based model and organization. So I think having something more specific to Bend, knowing that we're different than the surrounding jurisdictions, is a worthy investment. And economic development being categorized as its own goal area in this biennium is also a change. So for all those reasons, I think that this makes a lot of sense. And having an economic development strategy has been in the biennium council goals for this is the third consecutively, and we haven't gotten there yet. So Jonathan and I really wanted to put a line in the sand to say, we feel like this can happen in this time frame, and here's what we need to get there. Does that answer your question?
Will you speak to your
Yeah, I can certainly do that. So historically, the city of Bend has had a sole source agreement with EDCO for economic development services, and that has perpetually been renewed. There is some pressures internally from procurement and also from our city council to look at having that be more of a standardized RFP model. So having more natural competition as we do with other contracted services that the city brings on. So we're going to be broadening that. And in the strategic plan, there's a specific step that talks about the development of the RFP, releasing the RFP, and the hope of having new or the same contracted service providers come on at the start of calendar year 2026.
Do we have a question online from John?
Yeah, I would say if there was a way for when people apply for business licenses to get a reminder for, you know, outreach, that would be great. I mean, as a bar owner, one thing I found when I was traveling to go to Chamber of Commerce events, Cyrus, you can speak to this. It's mostly CPAs, real estate agents, and insurance brokers. And it's not really reflective of the business community at large. So if we could try and reach out to people who own businesses in Bend that don't traditionally go to meetups like that, that would be outstanding. And if we could somehow tie that into a business license application, like, hey, thank you for filling out the business license application. Here's a survey on what we want for the future of Bend. Please sign it or please check it out. That would be great.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And if you have any creative ideas in which you feel like we could achieve that, I'd love to hear them. What part of the outreach that Jonathan and I want to do is through the business registration program and contact list that we have, and also trying to separate perspective from employer and employee, because I think that those are distinct lenses in which community members view things through. So I appreciate that notion, and we'll try to get as creative as we can.
So Cyrus, I mean, John, getting to John's point a bit there, I mean, number 18 and 19 of your focus group frameworks are small business owners. So I presume that's somewhat of that effort. 16 and 17 are industry representatives. What industries are we seeking to have represented?
I think they'll probably come from our target sectors that we've previously reviewed with council and that have been approved. So they're pretty broad. I don't think that we have the most specific industries that we're looking for, but I'd say probably most of the prominent employers that you would imagine. Some organizations that immediately come to mind are someone maybe from St. Charles or from Mosaic, potentially Saran or Sutera makes sense to me. Epic Aircraft was also named one of the largest employers in Bend recently. So I think having a representative from them, having aerospace be represented in some capacity would make sense, but I don't think we've distilled it as specific as that industry yet.
Well, as you know, coming up as being the Urban Renewal Advisory Board rather than just core area, I'd love to see some industry representative who is in one of our urban renewal districts.
Sure.
So Sutera or Serrano. Great.
Awesome. Thank you. Did you have a question, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, with the target to roll this out in December, and kind of the high level, I was curious what exactly you wanted input on from these people that you're reaching out, because it seems like you do have a high level target of audience, people that you're trying to improve economic mobility for.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly are you like trying to fill in the gaps for with this research?
I think we're generally just trying to leverage all the expertise that we have across a variety of our advisory bodies, and CAB being one of those. Wanted to make sure, one, you were aware of the process, two, if there were gaps that you already identified, having them be addressed as early as possible and proactively as possible, I think is really our intent. But by and large, I think Jonathan can correct me if I'm wrong, but everyone has just been encouraged to see some sort of progress being made in our economic development efforts. So I think people have just said to go, and we want to be a part of this, and how do we be a part of it? And we have welcomed that effort as much as is available at this point.
A quick question, in terms of staff being involved, we hear quite often that infrastructure is a real impediment to development, and particularly in our core area. And so having people representing engineering, public works, to be aware of what's happening and maybe be available for feedback or back and forth. You know, I just get the feeling like we had a very nice session with various staff, and we were looking at impediments for development in the core area. And we kind of identified some things like a design review process that wasn't working, you know, interim infrastructure potentials, or deferred fees, or, you know, different things that could make it work better. And so I'm just thinking that some of those things may come up in your discussions, and it would be good to loop in those members of your staff to make sure that, I guess when you get in, you'll have the pie in the sky stuff, and then when you come in with, well, what can we actually do? Maybe that session has some of these folks involved. If you don't plan on it already, I think it would be a good.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a great point to make.
I guess I know you have consultants on board, but I would recommend someone from more of the academic side and academic perspective of this whole thing. I mean, I know a lot of business owners think that because the way we've operated for decades is the way that we should operate into the future, and maybe that's not necessarily true. And so the academic world is way better at piecing that apart than existing business owners.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're gonna be contacting our two colleges here as well. I mean, and with the, that's a very interesting point of, you're doing research. If you can tell, I think you already mentioned that actually in some of the paperwork I read. that
They both should be mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's a nice comment to make, is looking at it, blue sky.
Well, I think they both bring unique private, public types of levels of support. I mean, and OSU's is educational, but also infrastructure based with everything they're doing in the district. So I think there's tremendous opportunity with both of those institutions.
So I think this is, a worthy project and a worthy goal. I do have a little bit of concern with staff's ability to do this. Cyrus, I know you're the business advocate, so I mean, this kind of seems more centered on your, what you do, although one person can't do all this, but Jonathan, we haven't really backfilled Ally's position. Seems like you're already kind of doing two jobs, and then this is a lot more to put on your plate while we're trying to expand our role and urban renewal. So just how do you guys feel about being able to do this on this really aggressive time?
We are hiring two positions that could potentially contribute to this project, one being an economic development officer position that would be at an executive type role. And then also a development navigator position, which is somewhat similar to Ally's scope and how she was helping developers through the process of permitting and all the regulatory processes that folks have to work through from start to finish. So I think both of those positions will alleviate other pressures from both Jonathan and I's position.
And those jobs are advertised now?
Yeah, the economic development officer position closed yesterday, and the development navigator position, I believe, is open until early May.
And you've got, adequate number of applicants that appear?
I believe so. From what I've heard, there's been a lot of interest, which is common right now for many of our postings.
Until they find out how expensive housing is.
Hopefully they're local. Just teasing. But yes, that is a barrier for the city and I think a lot of other employers in the region to attract talent. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry to sound like a broken record.
no, it's reality for sure.
Do you have any metrics that you're gonna track against as it's rolled out?
Yeah, and I think a lot of those are going to be tied to the borough investment strategy for job creation and private investment.
We'll get into that. Scott.
Another question, are renewal funds being used for this effort at all?
They are, and to James's point, we're really not.
It's really minor.
It is really minor. All of the consulting services that we're looking for really are in those focus groups for facilitation. I think it would be great to have a third party handle the facilitation of those focus groups, so Jonathan and I and other city staff can participate. And those are the only contracted consulting services at this point, and the majority of that budget is coming from urban renewal dollars. But it is minor, I believe, in the realm of 35,000 for the whole project.
That's all. Yeah, they're talking about the percentage of the project. So
Oh.
the majority of the funding of the project is coming from urban.
That is correct, yeah.
It's 13,000 times 30. So, yeah.
To put it in perspective, just the target sector work was around 50 for just that one report, which I think is great, but I think this is much more comprehensive. And between Jonathan and I, hopefully we'll save the city a decent amount of money.
Well, given that urban renewal is paying for it, I'd really like to see a focus on our urban renewal areas in here and representation of these core groups somehow, maybe somebody from this advisory board. Or developer or business operator, somebody who would tie into at least one of these three areas.
Absolutely fair.
Yeah, quick question on the climate friendly areas that are also kind of in the works at this time, and will also potentially be renewable areas. Is that going to be tied in some of the discussion?
Yeah, so Damien that I mentioned with our growth management team will really bring that perspective of the CFAs and also our economic opportunities analysis, which is set to begin this year. So for the broader planning efforts, Damien has that perspective and expertise to inform the plan.
Any other questions for Cyrus? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Okay, next up is facade and beautification grant program, but I realized after talking to Elizabeth earlier that we should probably do a potential conflict declaration, since this is actually, maybe we should have done it before the first one too. I don't know, but we should do it now. So, so Hank, anything?
Yeah, my employer is working on construction projects throughout the core area.
And so the nature of the potential conflict would be, there, in theory, if there's a beautification and grant program, your employer
Could potentially end up
working on one of those projects, but it's uncertain at this time.
correct.
Thank you.
I really have no conflict.
My employer owns property at 181 Northeast Franklin and 100 Northeast Hawthorne that could potentially benefit from one or all of these programs. Potentially.
James, no potential conflicts.
Okay, with that,
Honor John or Jennifer.
I don't have any conflicts.
Neither do I.
well, with that, then I guess we'll move on to facade beautification grant program.
Good afternoon, CAB. Jonathan Taylor, Urban Renewal Project Manager. So today we're going to be talking about some modernization of existing programs that CAB put a lot of effort into in 2022 and 2023. But to give you a little bit of background for our new members, CAB recommended to Borough to establish the Core Area Business Assistance Program, which was approved by Borough on April 5th, 2023. The program in 2023 awarded, well, one, it was budgeted for $100,000, but it awarded $64,250 in grant assistance to 4 businesses. 83% of that funding went to interior projects and 17% went to facade improvement. The 2 businesses that utilized the program for exterior improvements were Kalima Market, which was facade paint and lighting. They're continually doing that project currently. And Timber Kitty's Childcare, which was one part of their award, was for signage as well. After the 2023 grant round, the program was paused to determine the future of the tax increment revenue and the overall program structure, which was outlined in the staff report that you recommended to Borough on April 5th. Some of the discussion points that I'd like CAB to engage in today is the budget allocation that you recommended last CAB meeting was $500,000 to business development grants and loans. The proposed grant biennium amount for this program is $100,000, like it was in 2023. We've done some more research on what's applicable of what most business assistance facade programs focus on, which is small scale exterior beautification. We've identified that large scale exterior improvements and internal improvements are primarily funded through revolving loan funds. We recommend that grants should be focused to immediately change an area's look, feel, and vibe. The proposed facade and beautification grant program reformats the existing core area program to just an external facade and landscape improvement. The proposed program will eliminate interior and non-primary frontage improvements, focus only on targeted frontage improvement streets, and then reducing the maximum grant award to $10,000 with a required 50% match, which means the total project could be $20,000. So the proposed purpose is we need to begin establishing the program criteria and parameters for the administration of this beautification grant program and recommend that to Borough for their consideration in the future. And then what kind of matching grant program should we intend to support, whether that's upgrades to building facades or frontage areas, and how those kind of projects can improve the experience for customers and or people walking, biking, rolling, or transit area aesthetics and opportunity for customer-facing businesses in the core area. So the proposed purpose is the same as the core area, just more focused on frontage improvements. The proposed eligibility is the same as the core area small business assistance program, but it only focuses on the external improvements. Be located within a Bend urban renewal tax increment district, locate on a site with existing or planned ground floor commercial. Business tenancy must be demonstrated through ownership or a current lease. Proposed improvements must comply with all applicable City of Bend standards and are permitted or conditional use in the zone. And then the applicant must be a tenant or an owner with owner authorization. Some of the proposed ineligibility are interior improvements, primary structural repairs or improvements, roof repairs, non-primary designated facing street entrances, and non-permanent or temporary structures. The last one, non-permanent, that's actually a state requirement. Most urban renewal projects and programs have to be capital investments, so 10 years or longer is a general rule of thumb. Some of the eligible uses of funds can be the building facade or exterior upgrades, doors, windows, lighting, signage, awnings, paints, and murals, landscape beautification and improvements, which can include vegetation, trees, climate adaptable designs, and then frontage improvements, sidewalks, landscaping, accessibility upgrades, pedestrian amenities, and utilities, including utility undergrounding. Some of the proposed payments are a 50% grant match up to 10,000. So the total project for the actual site could be 20, and a reimbursement program, no progressive invoicing. We tried progressive invoicing in 2023, and that was a little bit of a headache because some project costs changed midway. The contractor said no. We figured it out. Everything is compliant with the development agreement that was approved by Borough and the applicant. It just, for future reference, we would just like to do reimbursement. So some of the key comparisons with the previous core area small business assistance program and the proposed program, the exterior improvements would be the only thing eligible. The core area business assistance program included any kind of total project cost, including hard and soft costs. We'd like to focus on hard cost in this program grant round. The small business assistance program had 4 tiered grant awards amount with specific matching requirements per those tiered. We're just going to say 50% grant up to $10,000. And then the reimbursement and progressive invoicing, we'd like to do reimbursement.
Can I just ask a quick question? When you say hard cost, so you're not paying for anything to be designed?
At this time, no, but that's going to be the discussion here in a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
As a designer,
Yeah.
I'm a little upset by that.
So one of the things we want to include in the future consideration, and so council, and one of their goals is to have success metrics with every program or policy. And so these are some of the proposed success metrics that we're offering. So the number of improvements as well as square footage improved, the measurement of ratio of private investment versus assistance. Did the project increase that property value or surrounding, and did it increase area spending? And then future decision points are what kind of judging criteria would you like to implement? The same thing from the last program or the next program. And then how would you like timing to, would you want just one application period, a rolling application period? Stuff like that is for consideration. So the discussion today, based on the discussion points, is are the proposed eligible project cost what you're looking for? Is the proposed project amount what you're looking for? And are there any other proposed changes to staff's proposed policy for consideration that you'd like to see before we bring back an official program? So this is a preliminary proposal for your consideration. Every year we knew that we were always going to bring back new proposals for existing programs. And so it allows CAB to have an opportunity to tinker, allow it to remain the same, or make a massive modification.
Actually, I'll get back to the design issue, but my question is, can someone apply for the revolving loan program at the same time as this? Okay. Because that was one of my major concerns, was that often what happens, and the fact that so much was spent on inside the last time we went around this, is that oftentimes these existing buildings are very non-compliant with current code. And if you did a certain amount of work, you have to bring the whole thing up to current code, and that includes an accessible bathroom, which can be very expensive, and it had to travel throughout. So as long as they can get the revolving loan to help cover that, I can see that. But I'm curious as to why you wouldn't consider design if you're getting a mural or signage. You're going to have a professional design that. Wouldn't that be a part of the cost to do that improvement? So what you're saying, like the other 50%, or it couldn't be, in other words, like our contribution maybe doesn't go towards that, but the matching portion goes towards that? I mean, it's unclear to me. Can you explain what your thoughts are?
So the proposal was just at this time is the hard cost, which does not include design. Or permit fees, building SDCs, anything like that. It's the actual capital improvement that borough would be contributing to. With your recommendation, we can add in those soft costs of like, well, I'd like to improve my frontage. I just don't know the design or what I want it to look like, and or the on-site vegetation. I would like climate resistant trees, and I don't know the species that is compatible with this area. So if it is a policy recommendation that CAB would like to have that included, then we're more than happy to include that into the policy proposal.
Well, I bring it up because that's the reality. If you're gonna do any of these kinds of improvements, the owner isn't going to know, like, they need to talk to a landscape architect if they're going to do that, or a landscaper. And they might need to speak to a building designer or an architect to figure out, or a graphic designer for sign, that sort of thing. They're not going to be able to do it on their own. So it's going to be a part of these projects. And I don't think we should exclude paying the professionals to help the owners get to the point where they have a nice design. So I would like to see it. It shouldn't be the whole thing, of course, but it should be included, in my opinion.
I'm just gonna agree with what Kathy said, and I mean, council hasn't been asked, but I haven't offered this opinion yet, but, I know in Portland, the Portland Development Commission actually had on-call contracts with architects and landscape designers. So if someone qualified for a grant, they could use get those design services for free. So that was effectively something that the city of Portland, and that was really, that was instrumental for all the reasons that Kathy described. So yeah, I would encourage soft costs to be allowed to be included in the calculation of total improvement fund.
A clarification. So this project would be $100,000 bucket, and the max that would come out for a single project would be 10,000.
For the yes, for borough's contribution.
Okay, thanks.
Could you explain the 500,000? This is 100 of 5,000 that has previously been allocated.
Yeah, so we're proposing, now remember, materials and services, and I'll get this into my staff report. The MS can be readjusted through a simple budget amendment with borough. So if CAB would like to allocate more at any point in the biennium with the MS approved budget, then that's up to CAB to make that recommendation. As of right now, the 100,000 for the biennium is for the grant program. That's because that's in line with what we had in 2023, 2025. And we're going to, in the next agenda item, discuss beginning a revolving loan fund. And that's where maybe the 400,000 comes into play as well. But all this will be coming to you in terms of how the structure is between the two programs, so you can make an adequate and informed decision to make a recommendation to borough. So we got a lot to flush out between now and then, but this is the beginning conversation of these two programs.
So Jonathan, is this program, is it applicable to more than just the core area?
We would like to structure it in such a way that it would be applicable to Murphy's Crossing and but with maybe potentially different design standards. If there's different goals and objectives of Murphy's Crossing versus the core area. But in terms of the process, I'd like to keep it as similar as possible, but the outcomes can be entirely different.
There's one street I have in mind, in particular, Second Street has some hotels that face away from Second Street, and the bit about, you know, only the store frontage being considered, like it can't be the back of house per se, I forget the language you used, but I do have a concern that it would prohibit, you know, street frontages that are maybe the back of the building from, you know, being applicable, or I guess I would like to see that be applicable.
That's a good point.
Yeah, like having a mural on these big blank walls.
Yeah,
I would agree.
The back of
But-
Safeway.
Yeah, because Second is a major, is one of our major streets.
Jonathan, you have a question online?
Oh, is that me? I was curious, I think well, 100,000 over 2 years, if I'm understanding this correctly, would it benefit 10 or more businesses, at 10,000? I think that a lot of business owners, at least clients that I've worked with, would like to improve their frontage, and they haven't done so because capital is an issue. So asking them to pay up front and then be reimbursed with 50%, I think is a barrier. And I'm wondering why you're moving away. I mean, the invoicing obviously is time consuming and problematic, but to really address the improvement, I think the main reason businesses aren't improving right now is because they don't have enough money to do so.
I'll just say, as somewhat across the board, almost all of the contracting and grants that the city manages is on a reimbursement basis. That's part of just the way our financial department prefers to see things roll out. There's, easier auditing and tracking of expenses. So I would say the vast majority of how our funding programs are formatted, even for smaller nonprofits and others, is on a reimbursement basis. But I think that's part of the discussion, are there compelling reasons for certain programs to work in different ways? What are the considerations on both sides of that? So thank you.
Yeah, and I worked with the Downtown Historic Society at another center that I was at, and I do agree with the person in the audience. I'm sorry, I can only see the back of your head. Sometimes having an approved vendor list ahead of time for landscaping, painting, signage would allow them to invoice, and then, so in other words, some financing or some delayed payment arrangements could be made as part of that package.
Hate to see the whole $10,000 grant go to just design work. I mean, obviously we have to have some design, but as the urban renewal advisory report here, and bottom line is we're trying to get people to actually build stuff. And so, I don't mind it being a certain percentage of it, but I don't want to do $10,000 in design that maybe gets built someday. Maybe no more than half, but depends on the scale of the project. But I mean, $10,000 or $20,000 isn't going to go a real long way.
No, I mean, I'm totally open to it being a percentage. I just want to make sure it's covered, because I don't think it'll happen at all if it isn't. I mean, I think that's a good point that's raised, and so maybe there could be some research if local banks or credit unions that might work with people that are identified for the program, so that they understand that this reimbursement is coming from the city, might make it easier to get those loans up front. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a financial person, but I understand the issue. But I think either having vendors that know what's going on and can expect that reimbursement, or the lenders knowing what's going on. So a little bit of outreach from the city, and sort of, I don't know if you can pre-certify or whatever the mechanism would be. I think, that would probably answer that issue.
Yeah,
I can
I can answer that question.
Yes, sir, banker.
I'm like, I forgot to raise my hand, but I can answer that question. Yes, absolutely. We do loans all the time from very small to very large. And we do take into consideration when a client has gotten some sort of grant from the city, and that we know that's coming back for reimbursement. We can put covenants in there stating that, you know, it's paid off in a certain amount of time when the reimbursement's set. There's all kinds of different things that that a creative business banker can do to get that type of thing done. So I can't speak for what other financial institutions do, other than I can't imagine that's not the case. That, you know, we're unique in some way. I mean, that'd be awesome, but I doubt it. And so, yeah, there's definitely ways that we can work around things like that.
And as far as, you know, we have city policies where we don't endorse certain businesses over others. And so I think a list of preferred contractors is probably not something that, you know, the extent of that we have is we have a right-of-way certification program. So you can go and look and see which contractors are already certified to work in the city's right-of-way. But outreach, connection, right, that kind of thing is definitely within the purview. I think highlighting outside of a procurement process, where we have different vendors under contract, that would be one thing. But outside of that, sort of a list of preferred vendors, we wouldn't be able to provide something like that. But there's definitely those connections and sort of resource materials, what to ask your banker for, that kind of thing. That's would be on the table.
There's also the Central Oregon Business, you know, the district that could be reached out to or refer clients or refer people to, and they would have, you know, local people that are in the core area that they've worked with. So it wouldn't come from a direct, you know, it wouldn't come from us directly. But again, that would, yeah, be my advice to just reach out to your financial advisor for help. But as far as the other things, definitely the core group, but that core business group has a pretty good handle on contractors, artists, different people in that area that they use regularly that are in the area.
Jonathan, question for you. The metrics that are listed here, are those kind of directives from Borough, or is that just sort of some suggested ways to measure it?
At this point, they're suggestions.
Okay. I'm just curious about the square footage. Because it doesn't seem like that's particularly relevant. I mean, for me, it's going to be looking at facades or sidewalks. It doesn't really matter so much how big the building is. I would think just, but. Really, how visible is it?
I would also like to see a focus on pedestrian and bicycle access to buildings. And furthermore, explicitly prohibiting like funds going to parking lots, you know, repairing asphalt, these kinds of things that are not going to bring any kind of lively atmosphere to an area.
Would repairs to a sidewalk or a parking lot fall under the non-eligibility as repairs? I mean, we list roof repairs, but.
So maintenance is not, can't be covered by urban dollars. So if it's.
Unless it's maintenance that results in the permanent improvement to the building, right? But it's not just ongoing maintenance, but it actually has to be a capital improvement.
So to your point, does the city require specific bike racks, or could somebody do an artistic bike rack?
So it depends if it's in the right of way or on private property. If it's on private property, you have probably greater leeway. And then if it's in right of way, then it has to be approvable under a right of way permit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've worked with that in projects of mine where like a giant apple because the city's thing was apples, and you know, so you can do something attractive that it attracts bike usage. But it would, I guess, depend on the frontage.
It would depend on the frontage, and I know there's some new ones that went in, you know, along Newport with the city project. So it seems like there is some variation allowed, but.
Just curious things.
If multiple properties are in an area pooled together, could they apply for a larger sum? under one project?
I mean, yes,
Okay.
technically, they'd have to have a primary applicant.
Right, but they could technically apply for more than the $10,000.
But it would be $10,000 per property though.
Okay, I think in my mind, that is just a small improvement.
But if you have a specific suggestion of how to make that route applicability, we can definitely include that in the conversation with CAB for the structure of the program.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
So are you thinking of, two adjoining properties that both want to do sidewalk improvements?
So they come in together and build some kind of improvement there, whether that's a mural or a statue or.
Or even landscaping. that could be
Right.
consistent.
Something to improve.
Sort of a synergy, category, yeah, does it contribute to more than just the project itself?
Could we, is it a goal that we could increase, like have an incentive that if one property owner decided that this is something they wanted to do, that could they apply for a little bit more if they brought in their neighbors or something? I don't know if that's worth discussing, but it seems like just having one building is great, but it would be better if it was like more. So I'm not sure if there could be some sort of incentive to do that. I don't know.
I can work with legal to see how we could structure it to whether it could be a discretionary disclaimer. Outside the purview, but it's still all up to Borough, right? So Borough can.
Yeah.
So in general, I mean, if it's more than 10,000, then you just kind of go to the revolving loan category, right? It's a bigger-
So the purpose of, the current purpose of the proposed discussion is how you increase foot traffic and visibility and feel as quickly as possible. And we'll get into some of the budgetary numbers in a second, but it's like, what can we do immediately to make that area feel better? And that's part of the current ordinance of CAB is how do you make recommendations on how to utilize the TIF that we got in order to generate more TIF in the future. So we'll definitely have that discussion when the actual, we'll have a couple of options for you to a la carte from.
So this is kind of a side, I guess I'm an HGTV addict, but I've been watching the Sebring, the little town of Sebring, it's revamped. And when they wanted to do facade improvements and they started taking stuff down, they realized, oh my God, this building's falling apart. And they had to do some structural work. So it wound up being a lot more expensive, even though it was a facade improvement. And so unexpected things like that can happen. So that's why I wondered if you could do the loan program as well.
Yes.
So it would help cover that. It's gonna be plus.
Personally, I'd be in favor of seeing the dollar not go up and possibly even weighted on, you know, your lengths of street frontage that your business abuts. Some way of balancing small businesses with big businesses and I wouldn't want to see I wouldn't want to see any one business eligible for less than 10,000. I think that's a good minimum, but I do think that if you had a business with a really long stretch of street, that I would like to see that the ability for more dollar, their cap to go up.
Well, that would go into the revolving loan, right? Is it eligible for those kind of improvements too?
But that'll all be discussed amongst yourselves when.
Yeah.
Because we're going to present both of the programs.
Well, they're related.
Yeah.
And then the advantage of the revolving loan is you give out money that you get it back, so you can use it more than once. And then grants done and gone. Then hopefully you've been invested it wisely so that you get a financial return based on increasing the improvement.
Yeah, I just think there's an equity component to a business that has 30 feet of street versus one that wraps around a block on 3 sides.
No, I think you have a good point. I don't have a good suggestion how to deal with it, but I think that's a good point. Something to think about. Because you talked about square footage, but maybe it's linear feet or something of frontage as opposed to square footage.
Did you want us to talk about the future decision points? I mean, so are those gonna be our judging criteria? Particular is that for today? or-
No, so future decision points would be like, that'll be the next thing we discuss in addition to some of the reformatting that I've heard today. And then there'll be key areas where we want to get agreement and then start drafting that policy. And then at a certain point, the actual program and policy and application will come to you for recommendation, and then we'll take it to borough. The goal is to have the grant reports available starting late fall, early spring. That way we get one more tax increment year and we really know the first 5-year average and hit the ground running in the new biennium.
So to get to James' point, the 50% matching grant to 10,000 and the amount of $100,000, how specific was Burma? Was it just, here's $100,000 for grants? And is the 10,000, did that come from, is that a staff recommendation or is that kind of dictated by borough?
Nope, so there is nothing yet dictated by borough. They haven't considered their budget or adopted it yet. But like I want to be very clear, the MS is different from the capital. So you, other than personnel and the intergovernmental transfer that we have for the IGA with the city, there's budgetary adjustments that can be made at any point. It's just what is the bottom line item is the applicable amount. So the 100,000 is just carrying over the existing program cost from last year. The 10,000 is just a beginning discussion point that staff wanted to see where you're at, right? Like the bare minimum. Because the last one, we didn't use all the 100,000, it was 64, so 60%. But then, like, was that the impact that CAB wanted to make? I don't know. And so when we start discussing the actual program aspects, you get to weigh the existing versus the potential new. So there's a couple of more steps to go, but for future decision points, like the judging criteria will be directly from CAB's recommendation to borough. Staff will implement whatever you recommend. Staff doesn't get into that.
So my feeling of the last program was more to encourage businesses to stay and that businesses that are important for the core to, help them out.
Mhm.
So, the market and childcare, things we want to see there, stay there. And so the money went to what was needed to keep them there.
Mhm.
This is kind of interesting because you're sort of breaking it into two components. And I was okay with it because there is this revolving loan fund, because I think helping to keep viable businesses there is going to be more expensive than $20,000, in the end. But I can see the goal of energizing the street frontage for sure. 10,000, I would agree with you, 10,000 is kind of the bottom because the cost for labor and materials just keeps going up. It's not going down. And we just need to keep that in mind, especially if certain tariffs stay in place, it's only going to get worse. So I wouldn't do anything less than 10,000. If there's room to do more, great, but
Well, if you look at the amounts we did last time, they're all greater than 10,000. Except for timber. Keys.
yeah, but again, a lot of that was interior stuff that the loans would take care of. So it's kind of knowing what's what on that.
But I agree, it's just 10,000 is not a lot.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're going to raise another 10,000, so we're talking 20,000, but even so, it's not a lot.
Doesn't go far.
It does not go far.
And you could also recommend a different match. Remember, everything is a la carte right now. So if you see or hear from the community and the people that you interact with that I can't raise another 10,000 in order to do 10,000, you can make that recommendation.
I see.
The last one was, it was various tiers, but the max was a 25% match of the total amount. I think like $20,000. So something like that.
So I kind of understand.
And anything below 10,000 was not match. So we'll present all that stuff to you, and then you tell staff how you want this program to be written, and we will write it and we'll present it to you in full form, and then you can recommend it for.
How many applicants were there last year?
We had 8 applicants, but 5 went through.
And part of it was incomplete applications or not quite understanding, language barrier issues. And so I think that those have been addressed. But that was part of the initial issue, was not quite understanding how to apply. And so now we have help for that.
I'm hearing sort of some general consensus that 10,000 really probably isn't enough to really get much out of this program, and maybe we should raise that maybe to 20,000. Maybe we should consider reducing the match from 50% to 25%. And then the judging criteria, of course, how do we make that investment on our part really count?
Well, and I also think the issue of kind of the linear length of what's being improved has to factor in there somehow. So if somebody has, an entire block that they're improving versus like 25 feet, there's a difference. And how do we make that equitable? I guess is my concern. I don't have an answer to that, but I think it should be considered.
I think that'll be the judging criteria at some point, but I mean, I don't think we should make the grants too big so that one project can come in and take all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to have
Right.
enough to spread it around.
And just so you know, in the investment strategy that you initially previewed, that's been now kind of wrapped up into the EDSP, we are going to recommend at some point to CAB about a catalytic fund, which is, I think, would help some of your massive, we want to see this 3-block radius improved. The revolving loan fund isn't going to match it. The grant obviously can't cover it. Maybe there's that catalytic, because that was one of the questions that we've been discussing is, what is CAB willing to recommend in order to make the area developed and improved and look good? So there's going to be that conversation of, do you recommend $750,000 to this project, knowing that it might not produce the metrics you want, but it will make the area look drastically better? So that'll be a conversation in the future.
And that wouldn't necessarily be a match. That would be, we think this is a
Yeah.
good use of funds. Raise the overall quality or attractiveness of the district.
And at any point, a business owner can come in and petition for assistance, even outside of a program. And you can hear the merits of that and make a recommendation to Borough, and Borough can consider it. But it's beneficial to have programs.
Yeah.
So it's equitable and people understand it, but at any point, somebody can come in and say, I'm ready to go. Here's what I'm looking for, and then you can weigh the tenets of that and recommend to Borough.
So Jonathan, do you have what you needed from us today on that? Okay. The next up is the revolving loan fund program. I presume that's you making that.
Yeah,
presentation
it's
again?
me again.
All right.
So the only thing that we're asking today is just, do you recommend staff pursue further research of this tool? There is no structure being proposed today. It's just, what is a tenet of a revolving loan fund and why are we proposing research of it today? So core area development, we know that development is not occurring as hoped for in 2019 when the core area report was commenced. As you can see, commercial, industrial, multi-unit, and residential are broken down based on the permits and permit valuation that the city implements. In 2021, these are the total permits. This does not mean completed. These are pulled permits. From 2021 to now, our primary commercial, industrial, and multifamily unit permits have not been pulled and are continually declining. The total permit valuations, this is indicative of our revenue status right now. In 2021, we only had about 5 million. In 2022, we had 70 million. That is the Timber Yards project and the platform project that pulled their permits. That does not mean they generated that value for the increment. This is the pulled permits. And from 2023 on, you have seen a continual decline in permit valuation. So the number of new commercial and industrial permits have continued to fall from 2021 levels. These pulled permits are just an indication of long-term economic investment in a specific area or the interest in an area. Currently, there are 13 permits for large-scale projects currently pulled, and only 8 of those are under construction. The core area finance plan projected an annual 5% assessed value growth over the last 3 years of tax collection. The average annual growth has hovered between 1.8 and 2.2%. This has led to lower than expected TIF revenues, and so with the continued decline of completed and active permits, we may continue to see the lower projected annual assessed value growth, and then with recent economic instability, there could be even a further erosion of that investment. So the reasoning why we want to pursue research of this is to assist with the continued investment in the core area while mitigating any over-leveraging of current and future tax increment revenues. With a revolving loan, it is a gap financing measure primarily used for development and expansion of small business. It should be a self-replenishing pool of money, utilizing interest and principal payments on old loans to issue new ones, while the majority should be supporting local businesses. But you may want to identify specific areas of interest such as healthcare, minority-owned businesses, or environmental cleanup. Typical uses of a revolving loan fund are acquisition of land and buildings, new construction, facade improvements, landscape and property improvements, and machinery and equipment. But remember, because this would be a TIF fund, it still has to confine to the ORS 457, so capital improvement. So most of the times you could have operating costs for a revolving loan fund. We can't do that under this research. Loan terms may vary according to the use of funds. So you could have a small scale capital development may range from 3 to 5 years, while loans for equipment are usually 10 and real estate loans may last 15 to 30. It's important that terms are fixed for the useful life of the asset financed. Loan amounts can range from small $1,000 to $10,000, mid-sized loans, and with larger loans up to whatever amount you would put a cap on. As a public investment instrument, a revolving loan fund is usually expected to result in a public good. So namely projects that namely projects that contribute to economic growth and community revitalization. Borrowers must address performance measures established by the loan administrator or the committee. So could it be a number of type of jobs created, increase in tax revenue, which I think would be one of those key requirements of this if it's TIF funded, private funding relative to public investment, and how does this benefit to low moderate income citizens? So in your staff packet, I provided a couple of examples of kind of revolving loan funds. So we have the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh, the Oregon Business Development Fund, and the EDA RLF program. So there is a process to establish a revolving loan fund. So we have to continue doing the research of the type of loans that we want to offer, where we want to offer them, how much we want to offer under, design the process, establish the purpose of the fund, set requirements, establish a fee, establish variable or fixed interest rates, how we want to develop the loan application, determine the administrative duties and staffing needed associated with the program, promote the RLF and capitalize with funds from other grants and individual donations, and then provide loan and technical assistance to borrowers. So in summary, we want to provide critical funding to where credit access is limited. So in the urban renewal investment strategy, we had this in one of the pamphlet detachable sheets under business and entrepreneurial development. We have found that new businesses and minority-owned businesses are considered higher risk by lending institutions. So this could also go to some equitable investment. While also, if you're a new business, you are considered higher risk, so your interest rates are higher. While a revolving loan fund cannot finance projects on its own, it should be a part of the overall borrowing package. Another thing that we do not want to do is create competition with our local lending institutions. We want this to be a gap financing measure or an interest rate subsidy or some sort of programming that helps them secure loan funding from a local lending institution that help maybe mitigate that gap or risk. And so we want this to include, we want the results to include new jobs, new businesses, a healthier local economy, but also leveraging our current TIF while not, and while mitigating any potential long-term economic issues. So that is the discussion. So there is no questions that staff is asking. We just want to hear your thoughts. Do you want us to continue to pursue this opportunity? And then that way, this will be a longer process. Establishing a revolving loan fund will be a 6 to 12-month process. But one thing is we want to identify who do we contract this to help administer it, because staff does not have the capacity to be loan underwriters. But how do we want the committee to judge the application, award it to the firm that's providing the loan, and then pay that firm the loan amount so they can manage the funding? There are a couple of nonprofits that do this on behalf of urban renewal, but there are also private institutions that have submitted RFPs to participate. So the private ones, they all submit an RFP, but then the nonprofits like Craft 3, MISO, stuff like that, that do smaller micro loans.
Here with Dawn, say, kind of start here.
And then
I love we love the programs like this just because there's a lot of businesses that aren't as bankable in the beginning. SBA has changed their requirements recently, so where normally it would be a 10% cash injection from a new business or a loan that would say maybe has some risk to it. SBA is wanting to see 30% now because of the failure rate of new businesses. And so that's a little tough for a new business to come up with. COIC currently has a pretty good revolving loan fund that they use. So I don't know if they would be somebody we could reach out to and look at how they're running that, but they're ones that I work with on a pretty regular basis. I think their cap is $250,000 that they won't go over. I think they can make exceptions to that. But yeah, I would love to see us pursue this. Obviously, I think it's great. And I think that they would be a good resource to talk to about how to work it.
They're great thoughts. Do you know, does COIC service their own loans?
Yes. Yeah, they're a short-term loan. And what they do is they have a committee of lenders that are local that serve on the boards that review the underwriting of that, since they're a nonprofit. And so they all get together and decide who gets what money. And then they have, I think, 1 or 2 people on staff that actually administer the loans and monitor everything and the titles and all the fun that goes on. So they have a full program there.
Sounds like potential relationship for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I refer him quite a bit. And if anybody that's on staff wants Patrick's information, they can just reach out to me and I'd be happy to connect them. I'm sure he'd speak with them about how they do things.
But it also could be a suggestion or a recommendation once we do the research that we contract somebody.
That's what I was thinking, somebody who's already doing.
But you can set your own interest rate loans, like prime -1 if you want to really be equitable or whatever you decide to do. But then we would have to pay probably an administrative fee on top of it, so.
Yeah, that might be something they're interested in.
That's something that's not under discussion for the city. The city has other loan programs that we do. We have SDC deferral loans, we have affordable housing fee and other different types of housing loans. And so it's part of a conversation about, do we need a more strategic way, a more coordinated way, maybe use some contractors to help us run those programs. So that's part of an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, I wouldn't want us to reinvent the wheel on this, so yeah, for sure.
The wheel on lending has been invented, right? We could tap into that.
It's there, trust me. There's several places we can look, not a problem.
Well, I definitely want to see this proceed for a lot of the reasons in the previous discussion. I really feel like people are probably going to potentially need this to complete their projects, and so I think it would be very important to move forward and look and do the research. So yeah, definitely. Personally, I think.
Sarah has her hand up.
Hi, everybody on the phone here. I was just wondering if there's any similar to what was mentioned around COIC, maybe Business Oregon has some resources with some of their small business lending and some of their, they have like a gazillion programs. So there may be something to learn from there. And so, leaning on, I love this idea. I think it's really smart. I think it's a really nice way to support a community and be wise stewards of the limited resources that the city has in the TIF right now. So I think it's awesome.
We work with Business Oregon quite a bit with a lot of different grants and stuff that they have. So yeah, absolutely. Their favorite thing to do is to just guarantee a note that we've approved. But I definitely think they're ones that we could reach out to for resources and more investigation on this for sure.
Don and Rachel, welcome back. Any comments on the topic?
Not that I can think of.
I have a question about what you were just saying, Don. When you say that entity guarantees the loan, what benefit are they providing? Is it a lower interest rate or?
It's not normally a lower interest rate necessarily. It's when someone has a collateral shortfall. So basically, if it was a newer business or someone didn't have any real collateral to offer, which of course most financial institutions want something, then Business Oregon will come in and guarantee or co-sign, or however you want to say it. They'll say, hey, if they don't pay you back, we'll come in and cover, a percentage of it. And usually on the higher risk loans like that, they're not giving us like 100% guarantee. It's maybe 50 or 60%, and then we take some risk. And so it's kind of a partnership that we have, but they have a lot of different programs too. Same thing. If you guys want information from them, I have a contact there that I work with regularly. Feel free to reach out and I can give whoever's researching this that direct contact information.
I mean, I think for what Jonathan's looking for from us, I'm fully supportive of this in general, and I would also like to expand that I think it would be wise to look at these alternative kinds of ways of backing up, other banks doing loans. Whether that's collateral or lower interest rates.
Well, seems like generally, everybody here thinks this is a great idea to look into further, and then we can make a decision on whether we want to move forward with it. But we need anything else from us on that? It seems like general consensus. Great. Next agenda item then, staff liaison report, 10 minutes.
Yeah. So one of the key things that obviously council has identified is really being data oriented, trying to find out where we are trying to establish metrics of what we consider success. So today I met with Visit Bend, and we are going to geolocache a area for the core area to start identifying consumer spending, visitation, and app usage. So we'll know where people are coming from, how much they are spending in the area, stuff like that. So we want to.
What is geolocache?
Like, you can tag a specific point, and so you get to, they have MasterCard data, so they get to see where people are coming from, how much they are spending. We want to start adding in, because not only is real market value and TIF generation very important, but so is the livability and viability of the area. So we want to start seeing how is it performing economically, and then where can we, as CAB, make the recommendation for programs to help further assist where there might be some detriment. The budget update. So we've been asked by one of our members to provide a budget update and some potential impacts on upcoming programming. So this is the first budget presentation that this group is getting, and we will do this now quarterly moving forward. I mean, not much changes because we get tax increment once a year, but you can kind of get to understand where the money is going. So the dotted line was the 2020 plan adoption TIF revenue, and then the green line is the current projection. That is just the current status quo of the 2% growth that we've seen over 3 years. The current MI, so the maximum indebtedness status, this is what we have spent of the $195 million for the first 3 years. So less than, we got room for growth. But it's also contingent on TIF revenue. So just because you have bonded or have the ability to bond for 195 million, you actually bond for what your cash flow can handle. So the breakdown of the groups are the identified plan areas that were identified in the support. So you have business support, open space, transportation, plan administration, and affordable housing. You've spent 9.2 million of around 65 million of your transportation allotment. Now, the allotment is just a guidepost. You are not wedded or committed to those specific numbers. The only number you are committed to is the 195 million in plan administration. So, so what does the future economic impact look like if platform does develop using a couple of different programs that they currently applied for? So they get to pick one. They either pick MUPTI or they pick Tiny TIF, or they don't develop, whichever one they pick. So as you can see, MUPTI and Tiny TIF are generally the same for the first 10 years because Tiny TIF would be a complete exemption on the whole entire improvement, but you get affordability out of the proposed project. And then MUPTI is, the commercial is not exempt, but the residential is exempt for the first 10 years. And then after MUPTI is completed, all that goes back onto the tax rolls. So you'll see a little bit of the variation beginning in 2038. If they use MUPTI, you get a little bit more in increment, but you get no affordability. But then the Tiny TIF, you get still a standard growth, but not with the full-fledged of what MUPTI can provide. And then the dark green is the current projection that we have in the first slide. So what would be the total available amount of TIF revenue between 2030 and 2040? Right now, we are still going to continue to operate under the 2% growth model, but right now, with that growth rate, we are forecasted with the available TIF balance of $4.1 million by 2030. This does not include future bond amounts or debt service associated with that bonding. You could have more as long as you meet your cash flow issue. But if you look down below, by 2030, there will be start to see some discrepancy between Tiny TIF and MUPTI, but also the status quo. We've assumed in this financial modeling, both MUPTI and site specific, that there will be a few years of higher than normal growth rate because you have increased capacity with 199 units being built in the area. So we assume that for maybe 3 to 4 years, there might be added development that occurs either on Franklin or near Franklin. And we've assumed that under both models. And then with the status quo, we continue the 2.0% growth rate. Any questions there? Rachel's got her. Go ahead, Rachel.
Thanks, Jonathan. I just want to give some context because I think Dale and Corey were the only one people that saw my email. So I just wanted to explain just because as the Park District, we're just kind of tracking the Tiny TIF program. So Jonathan and I have talked about platform. And I know some of you are new. I haven't seen your faces before. So nice to meet you, Jennifer. And just to clarify, the platform project is a residential. I thought it was just residential, but maybe I'm forgetting, Jonathan, project basically on Franklin and First. And they got one type of tax exemption called MUPTI a few years ago now, I guess. That was for $4.4 million as far as the tax exemption. And then now with the new Tiny TIF program, they're moving forward. And I know what Jonathan educated me about is they're currently negotiating the development agreement with BURA. But what was brought forth at a council meeting, I don't know, a few months ago is a potential impact of $14.4 million. So about $10 million more. So my question, just for context for everyone, this is such great information, was just like, okay, so there's an additional $10 million increase impact to the TIF and the increment. What does that mean? You know, we've been struggling to get, and I understand the need to like incentivize development because we've been struggling to get folks to develop and to create new increment. And so, but I was just wondering what this would mean if there was an additional property tax exemptions provided. So that's the context, and I appreciate, Jonathan, this data to show the differences here. And I'm assuming the red is actually the site specific in this regards, correct?
So just one point of clarification. Thank you, Rachel. If platform is awarded the TIF assistance, MUPTI would be rescinded. They are mutually exclusive. So just,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, there's a big lag. It seems like I'm hearing you guys. So sorry if I'm talking over you.
Yeah, I was just the difference. It was 4.4 million. It went to 14.4. Meaning whichever one they accepted, there was a $10 million difference in property tax exemption. So I was just trying to understand without seeing any of the data before what that meant for future increment.
So Jonathan, I know we've talked about this a little bit, but maybe we can kind of explain what the difference is, to the TIF. You know, because I understand that the tiny TIF, we collect the money, we just credit it back to them, whereas MUPD is an exemption. But it's shorter term, so, but I think you explained that there were some benefits from the tiny TIF and that collecting the money allows us to increase our bond capacity.
Yeah, so with an exemption in the state of Oregon, if a property is an exempt, it technically does not exist. It doesn't exist at all, so it goes off the tax roll. So when we bond, the bond council looks at the total parcel value of the area. And they will remove whatever's been abated or tax exempt, whether local, state, or federal. That being said, with the tiny TIF, they pay their taxes, Borough gets it, we rebate it. But we only rebate it is if they maintain the 15% of those units that they built at 90% AMI. They certify annually that they meet the LEED Silver certification, and they used 51% of local content. MUPD did not require any affordability, and that's not what they were approved for under the MUPD application. So there is a trade-off. There is, if it's all up to Jack Straw at this point, which program that they wish to use. Platform. Platform can choose to continue with their MUPD exemption, but they have indicated that they'd like to petition for more money in their site assistance. Or they can use the tiny TIF program and provide those benefits. It's a trade-off, and as Rachel was saying, it's if they go with tiny TIF, you get affordability, but you do get less increment over the year because you're rebating that added value back. And with MUPD, for the first 10 years, the residential improvements and that land associated, whether that's parking or the square footage of the land, is exempted for 10 years. The commercial is not. But the tiny TIF, whole property is exempt.
And the difference seems to be really, it's the, with the tiny TIF, is this, the time frame goes longer than 10 years.
For the tiny TIF for platform would be for the duration until plan termination. So 23 years, 2051.
So we don't see really any improvement in increment directly from platform. It's just the benefit of having a project go to catalyze other development essentially, and then to be able to bond against it.
Yeah, that's the benefit of both programs, right? MUFTI and the tiny TIF is to incentivize development on blighted parcels. So it's, what is the benefit that the city's looking for? Is it more affordable housing units in the core area along with residential improvements and capacity, for MUFTI, which is residential units and then eventually full tax assessment?
You said the tiny TIF is not an exemption, correct? It's a payment and then rebate?
Mhm.
Okay. And did you say both programs were for both residential and the commercial spaces in the mixed use?
So MUFTI is just residential.
Okay.
Tiny TIF is full site.
And that's, I mean, this is being negotiated by Borough and the developer at this point, so not like we have any really say to weigh in on this. This is informational, but I think this is kind of what we're dealing with in terms of reality, trying to get something out of the ground that's significant in the core area.
And I'll just say it's up to the developer, right? They have received MEPD, they have applied for tiny TIF, and that their tiny TIF is moving ahead. If they need to make a choice, right? So the application for tiny TIF is contingent on the repeal of the MEPD, or they can rescind the tiny TIF application or the TIF development assistance application and proceed with MEPD, right? It's totally in their court.
And MUFTI's time limited too.
Yeah, so it seems like the tiny TIF would be the obvious choice. What's the downside to it, do you think, from a developer standpoint? Why would they ever choose MUFTI if they have?
A 90% AMI restriction.
You don't have to have the affordable units. Gotcha.
Yeah. Right. I mean,
That's
they
the
do.
difference, yeah.
Yeah,
They do.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that would be the major thing.
I mean, I can't speak for platform, but net operating income.
Yeah, well, I'd forgotten about the affordability requirements, so.
Yeah, so much is outside of our control. I mean, people need to realize the city is not building anything. So, you know, we're trying to encourage it, but
How do we get somebody to build something?
yeah. And under the economic chaos that we're living in right now, it's not helping.
No.
It is not helping, so.
Strong constitutions, they move ahead with building some.
I mean, I do think that Bend has shown that it's a very desirable area and it's really growing and it's very dynamic and all that good stuff, but it all comes down to risk. And how much risk they're willing to take. I personally am not willing to take any risk.
And how much are we willing to help them mitigate that risk?
Yes.
That's kind of the negotiation.
It sounds like the tiny TIF is more beneficial for the core area fund. Is there anything that we could do to incentivize that more over the MUFTI program?
So, yeah, I mean, yes, but currently MUFTI is on pause, so that program has run its course. Tiny TIF is currently structured by borough with 9% AMI. Lower rent restrictions for those units for the duration of the program, and then they have other community values that they have to meet. So that program structured, but the program will be modernized or updated in the fall. And that's going to be my third bullet point here in a second. So we've been meeting with the chair and vice chair with city management, talking about how we work with CAB to further incentivize the development of the core area. And so beginning in July, we are going to start kind of doing some more work planning and not, the sit around the table and, hear all these like potential master planning of sites, property acquisition, like starting to hit the ground running of what you want to see happen in the core area and design specific programs about what your vision is. So instead, like, let's say you want 5-unit or 5-story buildings and they're modern, clean energy. What are you willing to incentivize that with? So you have a goal. What are you willing to put forward to make that happen instead of just kind of programming specifics? The ones that we talked about today is for those lower bar thresholds, those higher risk individuals, but then the overall development. What do you want to see on these sites? Is it mixed use? Is it all residential? And then how do we acquire property to do that? How do we incentivize that? And so we're working with our chair and vice chair, with city management on how to also identify other areas of interest and concern.
Well, that's exciting.
So be
I mean,
more
that's a
proactive.
change. I mean, that we have not discussed doing any kind of master plan at this point, is that I'm.
Well, it'd be on small sites, right? So we're not master planning the area because very small lots, but there are particular parcels where we might have the opportunity.
Well, I think it's also important to know that if the city is still moving forward with the idea of the city hall over there and what parcels those are and what's adjacent to them, it's going to have a big impact.
City management staff will present to CAB in July on that stuff.
On the status of City Hall.
On the status of City Hall, stuff like that, because that's my boss, Matt, and all that. So they'll present that. I'm not presenting. So there's going to be a lot of more proactive approaches of if we're hitting this economic downturn, what are you willing to recommend to borough to do? And it could be a la carte, ad hoc, incentivize one paper policies, whatever. The table is open. So 2nd Street ribbon cutting, we're still in the process of finalizing that event. There will be no meeting in May because we don't know if it's going to be at the end of May or the beginning of June. We're working with engineering about doing a small ribbon cutting because Dogwood is one of the businesses in the small core area business program that you incentivize in 2023. So 2nd Street goes right beside that. So it's kind of like a good faith, goodwill, like this is the first borough project. So it'd be a good idea to have a ribbon cutting. And then in June 26th is the next scheduled meeting, and it will be 3 to 6 p.m. And that's when we are going to talk about the single egress residential work session. So we'll be inviting Building a Better Bend. We'll be inviting our planning engineering staff to talk about the challenges of implementing that in the it's going to be focused on the core area, but I think we've had a recommendation from city council to have a broader conversation. And then a conversation with the fire marshal about, the issues, right? And so that will be in June, and then the intention is based on and I'll let Abby, any of you, actually, no, all of you were there except for Hank. So once we have this work session, we will come up with a recommendation that you would like to make to the city council for both about this potential policy, that this is a broader effort, but this is the first step to advocate maybe for this type of development. But that's a good. Took us back a little bit to coordinate all the screws, so sorry about taking so long.
That's good.
Who do we have coming in from building better Ben's?
It's gonna be we put out the request to the 3 speakers that spoke to this, but in a much shorter version, because we want to have a conversation.
Right.
And we'll send out the link to the actual original presentation, and this is all James's idea. To recommend that, then develop a subcommittee, and then once CAB has the response or request, we'll draft a letter and bring it back to you, and we'll recommend it to council and make in whatever they feel like with that recommendation.
That's great. Thank you for moving that forward.
Are you open to?
I was hoping you'd take charge though, to be honest.
Well, the speaker from Build a Better Ben that spoke to this lives in Seattle. I'm curious if you'd be open to other experts
Absolutely.
joining that live in Portland and outside of Bend. There's a number of people that we can.
Yeah, you and I are meeting next week. I just haven't scheduled it yet.
Okay.
Jonathan, you mentioned the development code subcommittee, the removing barriers. What's next with that group?
So staff hasn't made any kind of determination, but based on conversations with CMO, we would like to get CAB more out of the planning and code updates right now and get you more into the investment arm of the core area. So what you are looking to do. Now, there will be challenges that we identify along this process, and we'll make note of those code changes where feasible, but we want to get you kind of in gear of incentivizing the development you want to have happen in the core area, and what does it take to do that. There could be some code change conversations associated with a particular project, and then how is that recommended to the appropriate individuals for consideration. But, to wrap up the subcommittee, there are 2 still outstanding issues of frontage rate improvements and design code changes. We'll still bring that back to the subcommittee, but single egress was a larger lift, and we wanted to focus on that since that was a big discussion of the subcommittee.
Okay, so the recommendations that we made thus far are gonna go in the corner and die, or is community development staff moving this forward?
No, once we have this, the other 2 items, we're in the process of working with Paul and me to draft what we will recommend to the development subcommittee, and then we'll recommend that.
Yeah, she was pretty overwhelmed with other code changes, so it was not very time sensitive, but.
Okay, so thanks, Jonathan. Number 8, and I think that's our last. Yeah, it is, other than adjournment, but it's board member area of interest. We have a few minutes scheduled for this. I know Rachel had her issue that I saw in her letter, but have we adequately addressed that, Rachel, with the discussion?
Yeah, I think the budget feedback was really helpful, and I think the only other thing I had in there was if we're talking about opportunities, although I think this will be discussed later, it sounds like is still like revisiting the idea for potential master planning, maybe it's city properties or whatever it may be, to help kind of forecast the vision and help address some of the unknowns as far as certain property uses within the core.
So I guess this is kind of good of the order agenda item. If anybody has anything to enlighten us all with, or issues of concern.
So at 5 o'clock over at the Inquiring Fellowship, there's a program with Build a Better Bend and middle market housing, and I'm going to need to go to that very shortly, so I'd love to adjourn this.
I'm with that too, if anybody has anything else.
Oh yeah, this is John. I'm potentially starting a tool lending library that might be housed at the Habitat for Humanity Restore in the core district. So that's what's going on in the core. We have a meeting with them next week, so nothing's for sure, but I'm excited.
That's awesome. Nice job, John.
Yeah.
All right, anybody else? Going once, going twice? We are adjourned.
What a slam.
Thanks, everybody. Great meeting.
Thanks. Good to see you guys.
I was on BDAP for a